to introduce themselves, going first to the Commissioner and her team, then to the Chief Constable, and then to members of the Police and Crime Panel. Commissioner, if you'd like to start off for us.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Jane Kennedy and I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Merseyside. I've got with me on the call today, and they will introduce themselves, Clive Howarth and Nick Mills, both glad to have them back. They'll be joining me to help work through some of the later reports on the agenda. John Riley is on the call and he'll introduce himself. He gave you a briefing earlier on the details of the budget. Carolyn is also on the call and will be helping us just keep everything moving. And obviously, as you've said, Andy Cook attending his final Police and Crime Panel hearing, and Keith Dickinson, who will also be there available to assist. But I'll hand over to members of my own office first. Clive, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, panel members. I'm Clive Howarth, as the Commissioner says. I am her Chief Executive.
Hi, John
go
Riley.
Next. Oh, John, sorry.
Okay. Hi, John Riley, Chief Finance Officer to the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Nick Mills, I'm the PCC's Head of Commissioning Policy and Research.
Good morning, I'm Caroline Graham, Head of Private Office.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Andy Cook, the Chief Constable.
Morning. And members, starting with Councillor Sayers. John, you're still muted.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I'm John Sayers. I'm the Councillor representative for Sefton.
Councillor Aston.
Good morning, panel. Good morning, Commissioner, Chief Constable. My name's Councillor Jane Aston and I'm the representative from Knowsley. Thank you.
Councillor Gladden.
Councillor Ros Gladden, Liverpool City Council.
Councillor Jennings.
Councillor Sarah Jennings, Liverpool City Council.
Councillor Parsons.
Good morning, Councillor Liz Parsons, Liverpool City Council.
Councillor Jones. Councillor Jones. Adrian, I think you're not coming up as muted, but we can't hear you. Richard, if you can speak to Adrian about contact, if that's all right. We know you're here, though. Councillor Rowlands.
Councillor Rowlands, Borough Council.
Councillor Shaw.
Hello, everybody. Councillor Simon Shaw.
Councillor Hattersley.
Hi, everyone. It's Robin Hattersley, one of the St Helens Council representatives.
Mr. Pickup.
I'm Keith Pickup, independent member on the panel.
And Mr. Tadeo.
Good morning, Brian Tadeo.
Brilliant. Fantastic. That does actually appear to be a full house. Is that correct, David? Got no apologies.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Fantastic. Before I move on to the agenda proper, I would just like to raise a short vote of thanks, which I'm sure all members will support. As the Commissioner alluded to, this is actually Chief Constable Cook's last meeting with us. He'll be leaving Merseyside Police at the end of April, I believe. And an item later on in the agenda is to discuss the recruitment process to find a new Chief Constable. I'd just like to point out and say our appreciation for his long career in public service and public safety. a length of service that's been highly recognised, including receiving the Queen's Police Medal, which is no easy get, I think is fair to say, and for his leadership both locally and nationally in terms of serious organised crime, especially, which has been a long-running issue and one that has, I feel, the tide has turned against in Merseyside, in part due to his leadership. So I would like just to say thank you very much, Chief Constable. We have appreciated your time here and wish you all the best of luck at the, I will try and say the correct acronym now, HMICFRS. Thank you.
Spot on, Chair. Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate it. Thank you all.
No worries. Thank you, Chief Constable. Right, first off, item 1, minutes. That's pages 1 to 14 of your agenda. I will ask if these are a correct record. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend the adjourned meeting and the replacement meeting due to a personal issue that's cropped up. But are those a correct record?
That's correct, Chair.
Agreed,
Mr.
Chair.
Mr. Taddeo?
Just one query on. We discussed sending a letter to the Home Office to do with the. I mean, I haven't seen sight of that letter yet. Is it being drafted?
Bro, Mr. Moran, if you can come in on this.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it is in the process of being drafted, Chair, and as indicated in the minutes, the intention is to ensure that it's shared with panel members before it's finalised and sent off to the Home Office. There's been particular pressures in the period since that panel meeting that has not allowed us to get it to panel members before now.
Bro, I'm sure we all appreciate that. And Mr. Taddeo, if it's okay, we will have a full update on that by the next meeting, and I'm sure that will have been boxed off by then, if that's okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
Any further comments, queries or questions on the 2 minutes available? Are we all agreed that I can sign them as a correct record?
Agreed.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone.
Agreed, Chair.
Item 2, declarations of interest. As I always say, if you do have a declaration of interest, please alert me now. But if you, sorry, my computer just muted me then. If you suddenly realise that you do have a declaration of interest, please let me know as soon as possible, just so we can get this recorded. For the benefit of the doubt, for the avoidance of doubt, sorry, if it's something that is already on your council declaration of interest or your published declarations of interest, I don't believe it needs to be mentioned, but always better safe than sorry. So we can move on to item 3, supporting and challenging the Police and Crime Commissioner. 3A, Commissioner, pages 15 to 50, PCC's Precept proposal to incorporate Precept update.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make a short introduction to this, largely for those members of the public that may have joined us on this broadcast. I know that the panel have had a full briefing, as we've mentioned, from my Chief Finance Officer, which I hope has helped them, the panel, to understand how we've arrived at some of these decisions. In December, the government announced the police funding settlement, and Merseyside received an increase of 13.8 million in our grant. That's the direct grant that we get from the government. But that grant was to enable the force to meet their officer recruitment targets for the second stage of Operation Uplift, which is the recruitment of 20,000 extra police officers nationally by the 31st of March 2023. That's the government's target. So the government have not provided any additional grant funding for the day-to-day running of Merseyside Police, the cost of which, as you know, increases every year due to pay and price inflation, as well as national, regional and local commitments that the force has. These costs are expected to be met by the government through the Precept and or by efficiencies from the force. We decided, the Chief and I, to recruit an additional 500 police officers by 2020-21. And we are on target to have met that by the end of this current financial year. Really pleased to be able to say that. I think that's a real achievement, and the force is to be congratulated for getting so far ahead of the recruitment challenge that the government set. The Chief will be required to recruit a total of 660 police officers by the 31st of March 2023. So you'll see that we're well down that route. That leaves a balance of 160 police officers, and we propose in next year's budget to continue with the recruitment and recruit those 160 in advance of the government's recruitment target. So that will mean that by the end of 31st of March 2022, we will have recruited the 660 that the government asked us to recruit. And I think I'll do the politics here because the Chief can't. But you never know when government policy might change. So we took the view that with this extra funding coming through and knowing how important the number of police officers are to the public of Merseyside, we would really make this a very, very serious and dedicated effort. And I commend everybody in the force who's helped to bring that about. Now, coming to the Precept, the government announced that PCC'S could ask local taxpayers to pay an extra £15 a year for a Band D equivalent property towards the police service. That comes in through the council tax, and I can do that without the need to hold a local referendum. For us on Merseyside, that would raise an estimated additional £5.5 million a year here on Merseyside. The increase in the Precept equates to around 19p a week or £10 a year for a Band A household, which is the lowest council tax category, but it is also the amount paid by the majority of taxpayers on Merseyside. This would increase the Precept from £141.31 to £151.31 per year. That's for a Band A household. Now, I appreciate that by asking the public for more money, they will quite rightly expect something in return, which is why I'm promising a budget that will maximise the funding available to enable the Chief Constable to bring forward the recruitment of an additional 160 police officers, but also provide the Chief Constable with sufficient resources to address the inflationary pressures and the demands facing the force, as well as protecting police staff jobs and ensuring the deployment of police officers into the front line, not into police staff posts, which is the decivilianisation concern that we have discussed, you and I, the panel and I, on previous occasions. So this budget will deliver it with this Precept increase. Now, finally, you'll be aware that I'm required to consult the public on the budget and the Precept proposals, which is something I have previously liked to do in person. Genuinely, it's always a joy and pleasure to listen to the public of Merseyside talk to me about the policing service that they get. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, I've been unable to do that. As a consequence, I engaged an independent research company to undertake a telephone survey and also to host for me an online survey. I'm pleased to say, as a result of that, the overall public response has been 62% in support of the Precept increase. So I believe I have the backing of the public in making this proposal. I have the backing of the Chief Constable to increase the Precept by £15, and I would ask the panel to support the recommendations as well. Now, the report details the Precept proposals for next year. I know that the majority of members will have understood it and will be perhaps having some specific questions. So you'll be relieved to know I'm not going to go through the report in detail, but I know that I will do my best to answer any questions that panel members may have. And I know that John, Andy and Keith Dickinson also stand ready to help. So thank you, Chief. I'll hand over to the Chief Constable to see whether he would like to add a few words before we come back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chief?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just make a few points, if I may, just to give a sort of general position of where Merseyside Police are at the moment. And please excuse if I just go into a little bit of detail around it, Merseyside is the best performing metropolitan force in the country. It has been for the last 4 years. It's a particularly challenging time for policing at the moment because on top of our daily business, we are dealing with the pandemic and all the issues that are associated with that. It may reassure the panel to know that Merseyside Police has the highest detection rate of all metropolitan forces, twice as high as some of the city regions in the country. And I'm sure you'll agree, the way that the force has dealt with some of the high-profile issues we've seen over the last year, drugs issues, county lines issues, murder, gun crime, they've all been exceptionally professionally dealt with by a really committed group of staff. I'll be honest with you, the staff are tired. They are working longer hours than ever before. They are having less days off because of the challenges of the pandemic and dealing with that daily business. And please bear in mind, in 2010, there were over 4,500 police officers in Merseyside. We went down to 3,300 at one stage, and we're currently sat at around 3,800 police officers. So we are still many, many down on what we were in 2010. Despite that, we are recruiting quickly and we are recruiting quality at the moment. And we are ahead of the game, as the Commissioner said. It's also really pleasing to note that we are getting a large amount of transferees from other police forces who want to work in Merseyside. They recognise the achievements of the force and the success of the force. And we are getting many, many other police officers transferring here from other forces around the country. I don't like raising Precept on council tax. I don't think it's the fairest way of doing things. But unfortunately, if Merseyside Police is to continue to progress in the way that it is, to continue to be the most successful metropolitan force in the country, which at the end of the day relates to community safety and increased community safety, we need to take the full amount of money that is available from what the government have said. I don't want to make redundancies of staff. That's not a threat at all. I do not want to make any redundancies, voluntary or compulsory. I want to maintain the numbers of PCSOs that we have. I want to ensure that we keep working as one team to keep our public safe. And that is what this full amount will allow us to do. All the investment we've had so far has gone into operational business. Local policing, we've seen the numbers increasing in Knowsley in relation to the local policing team. We've seen the new schools officers going into schools. We've seen the numbers of other local policing officers that we are increasing in line with the Commissioners and my wishes. We are putting staff into gun crime, and at this point I'll just tell you that we've had a 60% reduction in gun crime discharges this year compared to last year. It's going into road policing enforcement, which I'm sure you will all agree has caused concerns over the last few years. It's going into online abuse and organised crime partnership. The organised crime partnership we are about to set up with the National Crime Agency is only the third in the country. It will be a joint Merseyside Police and National Crime Agency team working to combat some of the worst criminals, some of the biggest gangsters across Merseyside. But it all needs funding. All the investment, as I've said, is geared towards local priorities and keeping our communities safe. And I'm very, very proud of what Merseyside Police has achieved over the last 4 years, but over the last 12 months particularly. This is genuinely a force you can be proud of. I'm exceptionally proud of it. And we are doing some fantastic work to keep people safe right across the county. And I would ask for your further support and continue to do that, please. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief. Right. So if we move forward, Commissioner, would your staff like to make any further commentary, or are we okay to move to panel members' questions? Sorry, Commissioner, you're still muted.
Beg your pardon. You like to think you're so savvy, don't you? And then you're suddenly not. I have no further comments to make. Obviously, I'll try and answer whatever questions the panel may have regarding the budget.
Fantastic.
Sorry, Chair. Could I just make one comment, and that is that we did circulate to the hosts, and I hope it's come out to the panel, the full detail of the public survey, so that you should have that as it's broken down into responses per local authority and per age group.
Fantastic. Mr. Moran?
Yes, Chair, that was circulated to panel members yesterday evening.
Bro. Fantastic. So if panel members can indicate using the hand raise function, or obviously I can see all of you at this time, but just for the future, I do have Councillor Rowlands, Councillor Jones at this point. Oh, and Mr. Pickup. So if we go, and Simon, I do see you there, but if we can go, Les, Adrian, and Keith, and then we'll see, and then we'll move on from there.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, Commissioner. Good morning, Chief Constable. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the force on the record. I think that goes without saying. It's been an absolutely superb achievement of what the force has done and is going to continue to do, I'm sure. And Commissioner, I'd like to say thank you very much for the information on the operation. The problem, well, it's not a problem. It's a thought. You made a decision last year to go for the extra police more quickly, the uplift, and whilst I'm certainly in agreement with having 660 extra officers. I'm really pleased that we can achieve that, but I just feel that going early with the uplift quicker and recruiting those officers, and not actually getting the money which is drip. It's actually putting pressure on the budget to actually keep those officers in place whilst we're waiting for the money from government. And I feel that is a pressure on yourself to actually put the budget up to the highest that you can on the precepts. I think in hindsight it might have been better to recruit a little bit slower so that the pressure was not on the precepts and yourself over a 3-year period, because the way I see it, that we're going to recruit the 660 officers a year earlier, and so we've got a year where we're going to have to support those officers and not have actually got the money from government. What's your comments on that?
If I may, Chair, what you're saying, Councillor Rowlands, is right. We have gone earlier, and that has brought about pressures on the budget. However, both my view and probably most important, the Chief's and his whole team, their view was we were at dangerously low levels of police officer numbers and the staff that support them. And because there was an opportunity to make the budget work for us, to enable us to get ahead and recruit more officers quickly, then we felt that was the best thing to do in terms of public safety. And I'm going to let the Chief pick up and answer it, perhaps in a bit more detail around what the tactics of that were from the force's recruitment decision making. But I felt that the public have supported this all the way through, and by judicious management, and Keith, I welcome some comments from Keith Dickinson, judicious management of our reserves, the way in which we've rescheduled some of the funding of capital projects has enabled us to make the budget balance. And I'm going to have to go because somebody's hoovering in the background, so I'll just go and tell him to shut up. Thank you.
Chair, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Councillor. It's a fair question. Just to reiterate and add a bit to what the Commissioner said. We were at dangerously low levels of police officers. We were struggling to maintain the level of public safety that I would like to achieve as Chief Constable for the benefit of all our communities. And we also need to just bear in mind that to train a police officer can take up to 18 months. So although it was over 3 years, we were talking about not having the benefit of these police officers for up to 5 years in the future. The need is far greater than that. The way we have used the finances to do that, it will be explained by Keith or John after this. But there was a real operational requirement to make sure that we were ahead of the game and we were getting the best recruits into Merseyside. It's really important not just to have the quantity, but to have the quality of the police officers, and the pool for that runs right across for here, the Northwest. So getting those quality people in quickly was a requirement. Getting the numbers in to support those officers who, as I say, are doing too many hours and having too few days off was really important. And I think to a great extent, the results speak for themselves. The successes we are seeing in the reduction in gun crime, the successes in the increase in detection of burglary, the increases we are seeing in relation to being the best performing force for detections across the board means that we are on the front foot in tackling some of our worst criminality. We are keeping a lot of those organised criminals and gangs on the back foot, and we are seeing some real successes. In relation to how the finance was shaped around that, I'll pass on, if I may, to John or Keith.
Well, yeah, Mr. Riley.
Yeah, I mean, we've considered all the options, and clearly the Commissioner and the Chief would really support of the additional police officers, and we constructed a budget to do that, and also address all the inflationary pressures that we have, and that's what we've done. I mean, we have managed the budget to enable us to recruit those officers, and obviously we were able to do that with the budget that's been proposed.
Well, Councillor Rowlands, is that
yeah, I can. Whilst I've said I'm really the 660 officers, there's no doubt about that, and we did need them. It was just the pressure being put on the ratepayers, if you like, in one foul swoop. I accept that, and I accept that the decision has now been made, and obviously we're going to have to pay for that. I would hope that in the next year's precepts and following precepts will show that in not going for the maximum amount of precept, because obviously we've done it now and we don't need to do it later. So I hope that will reflect in the future year's precepts.
Rob, thank you.
Chair, can I just suggest, Keith Dickinson's got his hand up, but I just wanted to say that if we hadn't have had the pressure of recruiting these officers, there would have been, we probably wouldn't have taken the steps to reschedule some of the capital costs, because clearly you want to clear capital costs as soon as possible to help manage the overall long-term financial pressures that the force faces. But I know Keith can perhaps just say one or two words, if that's okay.
Of course, Mr. Dickinson. Yeah, Mr. Dickinson, sorry, you're not muted, but we can't actually hear you.
Chair, can I suggest that Mr. Dickinson and Councillor Jones both leave in the meeting? They both appear to have audio issues, which quite often is corrected just by leaving and rejoining. I'm happy to help. Happy to give them both a call if needs be.
Yeah, that's sensible. Adrian, if you're okay to step off the meeting and join, if that's okay, and then we'll see if that fixes your issues. Adrian, I'll keep your question till you're back on. And if we can move to Mr. Pickle.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for the delay. Questions really relating to, one, the survey. I'm a little bit surprised, I have to say, at the confidence you seem to have relating to the outcomes of the survey. 62% in favour is not too high, particularly given that there is 2,000 respondents, to including both the online and the telephone survey. And for example, in the online survey, 50% of the respondents were from one part of Merseyside. I just wonder. I just wonder whether the cost of an external body actually produces the results that we ought to have been looking for in terms of both a larger number surveyed and a better breakdown, particularly again using the example of BME breakdown, which only shows 4% and 3% in both categories. That seems to be a particularly low element given the nature of the area that's being surveyed. That's in relation to the survey. In regard to other matters, in February 2019, the panel referred to your own office costs and suggested that the office costs to the same challenges that the forces put to. And I know a suggestion at the time was that a similar sort of percentage cut might be engaged. Now, I know from John on Monday that you have a standstill budget as far as your office is concerned, but it does not seem to reflect the point which we've made as a panel in previous years about potential aim to reduce expenditure. Finally, my question would be, why cannot some part of the reserve be used for the cut down the amount of money asked of local residents?
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. 3 points there. The first one on the survey, the company SMSR Limited, who we contracted to do the work for me, are widely used by police and crime commissioners across England. They are well regarded, and they have done this work because of the circumstances in which we're all in for a significant number. And in their report, they describe why I can have confidence, 95% confidence in the figures being produced. So statistically, they're saying that they've got confidence and that I can also be confident in the results that they're reporting. What I felt was really important was that there are quite significant variations between those who responded online and those who responded after being contacted by telephone. And the numbers in support of a Precept increase when contacted and surveyed by telephone are significantly higher than those who responded online. Now, I believe that in combining the two together to arrive at the number of 62%, I have reflected upon the fact that a significant number of those who contacted me online were not in favour of the Precept increase. In fact, a small majority were against the Precept increase. But that was balanced against the numbers who responded by through the telephone survey to say that they were in favour of the increase. So I think I am confident that the 62% reflects a proper, it's a number that I've got confidence in, that it does reflect the opinions of people across Merseyside. Now, it's not a huge sample survey. I know that's a criticism that people might make. However, it is a normal size for this level of survey to be conducted to assess public opinion. It's what Ipsos and Mori and all those big national opinion polls would consider to be a reasonable sized sample. I think in previous years, when I looked at comparisons of my doing face-to-face surveys in supermarkets and in public venues, We have sometimes, in most years, got more than this outcome, but in other years we've got fewer. So I have accepted that this has been a proper process that has been well run by the company, and that they have provided me with a reasonable snapshot of public opinion, sufficient to give me confidence that the proposals in the budget are broadly supported across Merseyside. You did ask one or two questions around the detailed areas, the BAME numbers and so on. I think it's fair to say they reflect the numbers of BAME people in the communities across Merseyside, and I'm satisfied that this survey is a good survey. On office costs, you ask why we haven't done more to reflect that. I do feel that we do work very hard to keep office costs down. We haven't increased the costs of my budget for a long time, and consequently, year on year, that is a reduction in the overall resources available to me to conduct my work and to work with the force to scrutinise their performance and to work with the chief. And do you know what? I've forgotten to write down the third point that you asked, the third question that you had. And I apologise.
That was in relation to the reserve. Why can't some of the reserve be used to minimise or to lessen the amount put on residents?
Chair, will you allow me to ask either Keith, if he's back in the meeting, or John to pick up that?
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
we are using reserves, yeah.
If I'll take that, Chair, if you don't mind. We could use reserves, but the problem with that is, Keith, it's one-off. It just creates a problem in future years, and that's the reason for not doing it.
Mr. Pickup, are you happy with the responses you've received?
I would probably prefer a lot more, but I'll take that at the moment. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pickup. Councillor Jones?
Oh, can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Oh, very good. Well, first, thank you, Commissioner and Chief Constable, for your reports. And Chief Constable, all the best wishes for the future. Also, thank you, Les Rowland, because he stole most of what I wanted to ask. So the one remaining point that I would have liked to cover is it's really good to know that we're doing so well in performance and in the police uniformed police numbers. How are we doing in the back office? Because I should imagine there's been a bit of a hit there as well. Are we managing to recover in the support staff as well as the front line?
Chief, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Councillor. We are maintaining numbers. I think the concern, if we don't get the full Precept amount, is that it will put pressure on our police staff more than police officers, because the way the targets are set by the government is that we need to hit so many numbers of police officers, and police staff aren't counted as part of it. So the points that the Commissioner made previously in relation to de-civilianisation and putting police officers into police staff posts and then having to seek voluntary or the redundancy for the police staff who are in those posts has been a real concern for us. We have obviously planned around if we need to do that or not. We have identified posts that we would need to de-civilianise on that basis. Should we receive the full Precept amount, we will not need to do that this year, and there will be no compulsory redundancies of any Merseyside police staff, which is the position that we need to be in at the moment, because our police staff play as much a vital role in keeping our communities safe as our police officers do, and it is a real one-team effort and approach.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I have remaining Councillor Shaw, Councillor Jennings, Councillor Sayers and Councillor Hattersley. So, Simon, if we could go with you first.
Yeah. Just to be upfront, I would say what I have to say is more in the way of an observation than a question, and therefore I'm happy to go now, but I'm happy to wait for other people, colleagues, to ask questions. To you, Chair.
Simon, if you go ahead, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. It's really to make the obvious point, and in a way, I think the Chief Constable touched on the concern that I'm sure all members, I mean, we as members of the panel, obviously representing the 5 district councils on Merseyside and the council taxpayers, but I think it's important to remind ourselves of the enormous extra financial burden that there's been over the last 4 years. The increases in the police precept going back 4 years ago, so 2018-19 over the previous year was 7.25%. The following year was a massive 13.5%. Last year it was 5%. Obviously, all these massively above inflation. And then this year, 7.07%. And if you compound that up, which is what you should do, I think it was Einstein said that compounding is the 8th wonder of the world, or anyway, but it is the correct thing to say, that what that means is over 4 years, council taxpayers in Merseyside are paying, if this goes through, 36.7% more than they were 4 years earlier. And I think I've said this sort of thing before, probably most particularly 2 years ago when we had that massive 13.5%. And it's not because I admire the police commissioner or indeed the chief constable, but I generally don't blame them. This is down to the government. And I think the problem is that the government keeps on effectively loading massive extra burdens in the police precept because they think they can get away with it. And in a way, they can get away with it because it's a sensitive area. It's this thing of, well, my view is, I don't know whether any police commissioner will, but it's very difficult for a police commissioner to propose less than the maximum they can without a referendum, because the government will then say the obvious thing: hang on, you're complaining you haven't got money for police officers, etc., and you didn't take up the opportunity. So my view is, and this is obviously a political point, which is why I say it's rhetorical more than whatever question, is that it is shameless on the part of the government. I do observe that 2 years ago, we'll obviously come to this later, but the first part of the resolution that we had 2 years ago pointed out that the PCC's precept increases over the last 2 years together had meant that Merseyside council taxpayers will have been expected to carry the burden of a 21.7% increase in this precept over that period. Obviously, what we can now do is replace that by 4 years and 36.7. As I say, at the end of the day, I think the commissioner or any commissioner is between a rock and a hard place for the reasons I've indicated, but it doesn't make it right. And just to make the obvious point that I think all councillors would have in mind, and I think that the Chief Constable alluded to it, the problem is this: I'm not opposed. I think there needs to be increases in taxation, you know, in the COVID situation, etc., or post-COVID. The problem is council tax is an amazingly regressive tax. Yeah. Colloquially, it's one of the least fair taxes. The less your income or your wealth, proportionately, not in cash terms, but proportionately, the more council tax is a burden on you. And that means that to keep loading massive amounts extra, as the government is forcing police commissioners to do, and then we've got the 5% increase, including this sort of Mickey Mouse social care precept at 3%. It's a 5% increase. It's not a 2% plus a 3%. It's a 5% increase, and then 7% here. And it's simply not right. But it's not the commissioner's fault. It's not the chief constable's fault. It's not this panel's fault. It's the present government's fault. As I say, that is much more in the way as an observation than a question, but I'll leave it like that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. I appreciate that point. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to associate myself with what Simon said there. We don't often agree in council, me and Simon, but on this we're on all fours. It is a terribly regressive tax, and although I'm minded to support the precept, and I do recognise both the chief and the Commissioner, in between a rock and a hard place with this one, as are the local councils. I'd like to congratulate and the Commissioner on the performance of the force. It's quite incredible, really, given the pressures that they're under. So, you know, it really is an outstanding performance. One of the questions I'd like to ask Commissioner or of the Chief is in paragraph 4420 and 4421, we look at the current vacancies in the force, and I see that we're carrying 188 full-time equivalent vacancies, which was only 7, I think, last year. I'm just wondering why that's increased so much. Has the savings from that been built into the budget? And what does that mean for our uplift? Are we getting the uplift officers plus, are we filling those 188 vacancies, or is the uplift net of the 188? So that's a question for the Chief. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Commissioner.
Chief? Does the Chief want to pick
Yes.
that up?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up if that's okay. Thanks for the question, Councillor. Yeah, we do need to recruit far more than the 660 because retirement's ongoing as we go through, and we do get peaks of retirements and troughs of retirements right through the year. The 188 is a snapshot in time, Councillor. So whereas we're getting 660 more funded, that means because retirements, because people are coming to the end of their service, we are probably at times recruiting nearly twice that many to make up the numbers in relation to it. So it's a continuous churn of retirement recruitment. I've just welcomed another 60 police officers into Merseyside Police. Probably 40 of those will be as part of the government target, 20 are replacing those who are retiring at the right times. So you're right to raise it. It is a moving feast. In 2 months' time, it might be, that number might be vastly different, but this is very much a moment in time figure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Chief. Yeah, it does clarify the point for anybody reading the report. I'd also just like to express to the Commissioner, I spoke to the Finance Officer the other, and it's not a direct criticism of the report, but we continually talk about savings, and actually we're talking about cuts. And I'm just wondering whether in future reports we might describe things for what they are. You know, it's a bit like now we're getting the new buzzword. We used to have a pay freeze, now we're getting a pay pause, which all sounds very cuddly, until you realise, you know, if inflation's at 2.5%, we're talking about a 2.5% cut. Also noticed from the report that because of the pay cut or pay pause or whatever you want to call it, saves the force something like 4.67 million, I think. And of course, what that means is police staff, police officers and their families are going to contribute towards the running of Merseyside Police to that tune. Indeed, in your office, I think it's a £25,000 cut or saving or whatever. And again, your staff are contributing indirectly £25,000 to the force. So there's a great deal of smoke and mirrors here. But I hasten to add, not smoke and mirrors from the force, from the Chief or from your office or yourself. But I think, you know, the public need to know what's happening here. And I think what Simon said about the shift in the burden of almost over a third now of the burden of finance in the force being shifted onto the taxpayers who can probably least afford to pay it, or the ratepayers, I should say, is not short of a scandal. But thank you very much. As I said, I really do appreciate the work that you do. It's a great performance.
Thank you. Thank
Chair,
you.
do you want me to?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'll just do a response to both what Councillor Sayers and Councillor Shaw have said. As far as you go, what you're saying about the wording, Councillor Sayers, I completely agree with you. But you and I are politicians, and that's the language that we would use. These reports are formalised reports that need to be read and understood by everybody, and without us putting our own spin on it. The government would say that actually what we're asking the British police to do is to constantly find efficiencies, and therefore asking forces to measure what they do and to examine performance and to look for ways in which performance can be maintained without ever increasing funding, whether that funding comes through general taxation or through local taxation. I believe that's a reasonable thing for a government to require of an important public service. However, you're right, the freeze on public sector pay, which they're calling something else, a pause. Well, it's not a pause because the staff are never going to get that money back. So it is a cut in their pay, and I agree with you. It's a very uneasy and uncomfortable thing for us to have to budget for. But just going back to the more general point about the increases and the shifting of the burden, I agree with Councillor Shaw that this is a regressive form of taxation. I've always agreed that. However, across Merseyside, I am the only public body elected to position who is required to hold a public consultation. No other elected body across Merseyside is required to conduct a public survey to find out public opinion around a tax rise. And every single year, the public have supported increasing the police precept in order to help the police budget. And that tells me two things. First of all, in later years, these later years where we have been increasing it more steeply, they have been getting something back. In each of those years, I've been able to go to the public and say, I understand that this will increase the burden upon you. However, in return, the Chief Constable will be able to recruit however many numbers of officers our plan was that year. And this is before Operation Uplift. This was when we were beginning to win the argument on the issue of austerity. So the public have been getting something for the extra precept costs that they've been facing. And for me, that's the reassurance every year that we're doing, myself and the Chief Constable, we're doing the right thing. We're doing what the public want us to do. It reflects what's happening across policing across the northwest of England, where these precepts are generally supported, and therefore I don't feel that I am out of step with colleagues around the region. And I would just I just want you to understand that I absolutely do appreciate the fact that we are asking some of the poorest households in Britain to contribute more for a really essential emergency service. And it's a credit to Merseyside Police that the public of Merseyside continue to say year on year that they will agree to do that. And the last point I would make is that when you consider all of the burdens on a household budget, an increase of 19p a week in one part of that budget for what they get in return, most members of the public say to me that's a reasonable price to pay. So it's a difficult argument. This I understand what the panel members are saying, but at the same time, I have to set a budget. That's the primary responsibility that I have, and for me, this is the best way to do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that. I have three more points that three more councillors, sorry, who would like to raise points, and then I will be making progress and moving on to our decision. First of all, I'd just like to put on record my apologies to Councillor Jennings, who, I'll be quite honest with you, I was writing down names of people who need to, who've raised their interest in speaking, and my handwriting is that bad. I've written Sayers and Sarah next to one another and mistook them for each and called on John first. So I would like to go to Councillor Jennings first, and then I've got Councillor Hattersley and Councillor Parsons, and then I will be making progress to our decision. Councillor Jennings.
I'd like to ask some questions, please, if I may.
I can't hear.
Yeah, sorry, Sarah, I can stop you there. Your connection's quite bad. Are you using your computer mic?
I will. I'll lean forward a bit. Is that any better?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, it's about the diversity of your new recruits. The document says you're looking to address some balance with gender and other diversity issues. So basically, with your new recruits so far, how's that going? And then I have a concern that the speed of this recruitment, is that offering enough time to approach different communities, to encourage applicants from different backgrounds? And then do you have the financial element of the question? Is there a dedicated fund for that to specifically address that kind of imbalance within the workforce? Thank you.
Chief, do you want to respond to that? That's quite an operational.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Councillor. Yes, it remains a continuing concern about being representative of the communities that we serve. We actually are in a better position than most other metropolitan forces in relation to it, but we still want to recruit more people from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background. We are seeing good numbers applying at the moment from the Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds. I'm very pleased to say on the most recent people who have expressed an interest and put initial application in, we have 80 in total, which is good. Now, not all of those 80 will become police officers, I hasten to add, because of the processes that they will go through. We are targeting different communities on a daily basis. We target not just within Merseyside, but outside Merseyside, because as you'll be aware, Merseyside is roughly 95% white European. So the pool of candidates is smaller than we can attract from across different parts of the country. And we do that on a regular basis. We fund initiatives such as the Phoenix Initiative, which is brings in a positive approach to encouraging and mentoring people to apply from our harder to reach communities. Am I happy with the numbers we have, particularly young Black men, which is where we struggle to recruit? No, I'm not. But can I reassure you that we are doing all we can, including working with our communities throughout to do so. And we've got some really good initiatives ongoing at the moment. But the pace is too slow and I need community support to increase that.
Thank you. I think that answers it very thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Councillor Hattersley.
Hi, can you hear me? My internet's a bit funny at the moment. So my question relates to the community safety funding, and I am pleased that that has been protected. But the allocation to St Helens seems quite small in comparison to other areas. So I was just seeking further clarification on how this allocation is determined.
Thanks, Chair. Shall I respond to that and say it's based upon a formula that we've applied and hasn't been changed from police authority days. It is fairly straightforward. However, it's part of that review that we discussed last time at the panel that we are undertaking, and that work is in progress. So I can only tell you that it is the breakdown of the funding that we've had every year, and I'm sure that all areas would say that it's not enough to help them achieve their ambitions, but there is no deviation this year.
Councillor Hattersley. Brilliant. And Councillor Parsons.
Thank you, Chair. I have turned my camera off because my signal is dipping in and out, so I'm hopeful that you can hear me at the moment. Firstly, if I can thank Councillor Jennings for the point she raised on equality, because I think it's really important, and thanks for the answer on that. But I just wanted to come back on the issue that some of my colleagues have raised around my concern for the burden that we are putting on those most deprived in our communities at the moment. I note that John Riley stated that we could use reserves, but that would be a one-off and would create issues in future years. However, I think we have to recognise that this is an unprecedented year in terms of the economic impact, not just for the police force and businesses, but for individuals in our communities. And particularly at a point when it's already shown that the pandemic impacts more detrimentally on those that are already suffering inequalities. And we're talking about an increase for some of those in our most deprived communities and those communities across Merseyside where inequality is already shown to unfairly impact on them. And I just am massively uncomfortable with asking people to pay more at a point when they are economically suffering. And I just really wanted to put that on record, because I think it's something that we are in an unprecedented year. We're in a year where, I mean, I'm here as a councillor, but I work frontline in some of our most deprived communities in Liverpool. And the increase in people coming forward who are requesting food bank support, who can't feed and clothe their children, who are desperately struggling. And I do take on board what you said about your survey sample and that it was an online survey. But these most deprived communities that will feel the impact most are also those communities that are most digitally excluded and probably haven't been able to have a say. So I know you're doing your best, Commissioner and Chief Constable. I really do. And I fully appreciate that this is an impact of a 10-year government austerity agenda, but I just have to place on record my real concerns at the moment. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. The question around reserves, if panel members looked at Appendix 6, it gives you a detailed breakdown of how we expect, or how I predict, the force will use its reserves over the next 3 to 4 years. When we began this process about 3 years ago of the increases in the Precept, once they said that for many years it had been around 2%, and then it was lifted, the referendum threshold was lifted. I made it clear that I did not want to ask the public of Merseyside to pay more whilst we were carrying reserves that might be used to offset some of the increased costs and the cost pressures and challenges that the force faced. And I every year ask that same question, so it's an absolutely appropriate question and a good question to ask. Merseyside Police manages its reserves very well. It keeps them down. The percentage of reserves that it holds in comparison to its budget is very small. And when occasionally government ministers have said, British policing, you're holding too much in reserves, you don't need more money, you can use your reserves. I have asked direct questions. Is Merseyside Police holding too much in reserve that we could use differently? And ministers have consistently said they do not view Merseyside Police as one of those forces that sits on reserves and doesn't use them. So I'm confident that the reserve strategy that we have and that we demonstrate every year works. So unless Keith or John or the Chief would like to add to that, I feel that the concern that I have, that I share with you, that we shouldn't have reserves sitting, not being used without a very, very good reason, then I think the force is in a good place on that. As regards to the burden on the public, I've responded to that. In today's recommendations, I am personally confident that the public broadly support what we're trying to achieve here, and consequently, I'm content to ask them for the extra Precept increase. It is not something that I'm comfortable doing, but I'm content that we're going in the direction that the public of Merseyside want us to go in, and that they expect in return greater visibility, more police officers able to respond to the calls for help when those calls are made. So I'll stop there, Chairman, because I know we've had a long discussion about this and you're hoping to come to your decision soon.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Dickinson, I do know that you've got your hand up. I do apologise for not coming to you earlier.
That's okay, Chair. I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, so just to taking on some of the panel members' concerns there, and I share them. There's a few things I suppose to point out on the financial position is when we looked at the financial gap we were facing based on last year's medium-term financial plan, it was significant, and we've taken immense strides within the force to really apply a very, very prudent but really robust process to eke out all efficiencies, and we've particularly focused on the non-staffing areas to really bring those down, and we've been successful in that. Within the financial plan, we've got over £6 million of recurrent savings we've found. Predominantly, most of those are on non-pay, non-staff costs, because it's really important for us as a force and from the Commissioner's side that we protect jobs. The uplift funding not only gave us the ability to increase officer numbers by 660, it also gave us the ability to increase police staff numbers by around about 200. Without the approaches we applied to reduce the funding gap, of which the Precept is one of those elements, we would have been facing, as the Chief said before, at reducing our police staff numbers, and that's predominantly because of the way the uplift funding comes. It gives us the money based on officer recruitment targets. If we don't get those targets, we don't get all the funding, and it adds to the financial burden. The next thing to sort of bring in is that we have reduced the capital programme and spread it over 10 years, and predominantly for the estates. Now, you know, and we've also been able to reduce interest charges because of the way the economy is. Interest rates have come down, so that's reduced the financial burden as well. So there's a number of areas we've done and we are doing to make sure we are as financially astute and prudent as we possibly can do. And I can assure everyone in Merseyside that we do not leave any stone unturned when we are looking at savings or income generation. We absolutely go the full tilt with this, and we've got the full force support on this. Everyone's involved in this, and we want to make Merseyside Police the most efficient, not just the most effective, but the most efficient police force, of which funding's one of those. So I'll stop there if there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. I really appreciate your points there. I am minded to move forward. So I do have to make clear what the panel can do here. So we are obliged to submit a recommendation to the Commissioner on her budget and on the Precept by the 8th of February 2020, which is obviously later, you know, not far away. So there are 4 options available to us. Do we agree in all terms that we endorse the Precept proposal? Do we endorse the Precept proposal with additional recommendations? Do we reject the Precept proposal with additional recommendations? Or do we veto the Precept proposal? Now, I do need to make clear, and members will be fully aware of this, but I do need to make clear, if members wish to veto the proposal, that veto must have 2/3 majority on this panel. So we do need 2/3 of members, which are all council members plus the 2 independents. 2/3 of that number is needed for a veto. So I just want to make that clear right away. I will ask, first of all, if there is any support for all members who support endorsing the Precept proposal with no additional recommendations to make themselves known. If you could speak up, basically. Very well.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. Are there any members who wish to endorse with additional recommendations? Councillor Jennings?
Yes, Chair. Just if we can support. I agree that in principle, but I just feel that we need to make some comment on it, as we have done in the past, in fact.
And I feel the same, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pickle. We'll take that second. Councillor Aston?
Thanks, Chair. You know, many colleagues this morning have made comments about the system that we're working with. You know, I don't think there's any of us that blame either the chief or the commissioner for the position that they're in, and I support that they have to increase the precept in order to carry on with the good work that Merseyside Police and the good service that it's providing for Merseyside people. But as with last year, I think it's the system that we need to make some recommendations to about. They're in a difficult position. They have to work within the system that they're dealt, and I think it's the system that is wrong here. But would support the recommendations to increase the precept, but taking on board the comments that colleagues have already made around the system that we have to work with, adding the burden on local taxation rather than national taxation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Aston. Councillor Jones. Councillor Jones, I do apologise, we can't hear you again.
Is that better?
Yes, got you.
Okay. Well, I agree with what Councillor Aston just said, but the point I want to make is that I don't think any of us want to endorse a precept of this size, especially after doing it for so many years. But as I think I said at some previous meeting, we'll have to endorse it because the alternatives imposed on us by the government are abysmal.
Yeah,
we're not supporting this with any enthusiasm, but as I say, because the alternatives are simply impossible to live with. That's all.
No, I do tend to agree. As my mentor, when I first became a councillor, once told me that politics often isn't the choice between good and bad; it's the choice between bad and worse.
Yeah.
And that's no more in sharp focus than when we're coming to decisions around police funding and police taxation. Do we raise taxes on people who have been, quite frankly, brutalised by endless increases over the last 10 years whilst facing economic uncertainty? Or do we underfund the public safety authorities and put people at risk? You know, that is unfortunately the choice in front of us. And I am minded to support members' comments on what I would term as option 2, which is to make recommendations to the Commissioner whilst endorsing the proposal. My view would be those recommendations to raise the issue further with national government, whether that's the Home Secretary, whether that's the varying ministers, whether that's the Treasury, and raise the point that, quite frankly, Merseyside cannot continue in consistently footing the bill that the national government is refusing to take responsibility for. I don't know if members have comments on my comments there.
Well, I thoroughly support them.
Well, Mr. Surveyor? Sorry, and then Councillor Gladham. Brian?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I support them as a whole. I mean, I've listened to a lot of political influence on the committee, but in general, I support your comments.
Thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate it. Councillor Gladham?
Yeah, I completely agree as well. I think it's atrocious. We've got little choice really about what we do today, but I do think we need to send a message that this just is not good enough. We shouldn't be having police force or any other local services funded in such a way that we continuously have to put a burden on our residents. It's just not good enough, particularly, as Councillor Parsons has said, in this particular year when we've got people we're having to feed here. We've got families we're having to feed because they haven't got any. They've got no food. They have nothing for the children. And this is just not acceptable that the government continuously abdicates responsibility for local services So I would support that. We've got to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councillor Gladden. Councillor Parsons.
Thank you, Chair. I support what you've said in terms of raising the issue again, and quite strongly. My only concern is that we did that last year and the year before as well, and still we're in a position of having to put the responsibility on our residents. And this year, it's a year that I'm really sorry I can't support that. I just think that the impact and financial burden on our most deprived communities is already at a point where I cannot support putting further financial burden, and I just think we need to revisit reserves.
Okay. So there are two proposals, as it were, in front of us.
Just to interrupt, Councillor Lynch, I think Councillor Aston has her hand up.
My apologies, Jane. Sorry for that.
It's okay, Chair. I was simply going to support the way your suggested way forward. I do think, and I agree with Councillor Gladden as well. It is unacceptable to continuously ask the people of Merseyside to. It's no way, to be honest, to fund a police force. It's as she says, they're abdicating their responsibilities, and it's not for the first time. So, if something along those lines could be agreed, then I'd fully support that, Chair. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, it's effectively a begging bowl to people who can't provide more anyway, and it is a disgrace. So we do have two options on the table. I will actually take Councillor Parsons' option first. Is there a Councillor Parsons, to clarify? Are you advocating a rejection or veto of the Precept proposal?
I'm rejecting at the moment, Chair.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Is there a seconder for Councillor Parsons' proposal? Councillor Sayers and Councillor Rowlands. Oh,
I'll second that, Chair.
Right. So apologies, I misread Councillor Sayers' intention. So Councillor Parsons' proposal is supported by Councillor Rowlands. All those in favour, please show or say. Councillor Rowlands, Councillor Shaw, I presume Councillor Parsons as well. All those against that proposal? That motion falls. On the table now is my proposal, which would be to accept with the recommendation to strenuously object to the Home Office and the Treasury that, quite frankly, they need to find a better way of funding local policing, as this cannot continue. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor Shaw.
Chair, can I just ask for clarification?
Yeah.
Your comment about agreeing with recommendation, your recommendation to approach the government is not quite a recommendation to the police commissioner, but a recommendation regarding action we take.
With respect, Mr. Pickup, no. My recommendation was to send the proposal back to the commissioner, saying we agree with the Precept proposal, but making it clear that we are effectively fed up with having to have these meetings further, and for the commissioner to approach the Home Office and the Treasury and advise that this position cannot continue.
I'm just wondering whether there are any further recommendations we should be making.
Very well. I will move mine from the floor whilst there's an option for amendment. Does anyone have any further amendments to make to my proposal? Okay, Mr. Pickup?
I would recommend that the use of reserves and the percentage of reductions are more fully observed and looked at for future years.
I'm happy to accept that amendment. Is there any objections to adding that? So the recommendation is now to support the proposal with a recommendation for the Commissioner to revert to the Home Office and the Treasury, making clear that this situation cannot continue, but also to revert to the Commissioner and advise that the use of reserves and rationalisation of staffing within the PCC office should be considered going forward more strongly whilst we consider financing. Is that a fair assessment, Keith?
Sorry, Chair, yes.
Well, Councillor Sayers and Councillor Aston. Councillor Sayers?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I oppose what Mr Pickup's proposing. Using reserves is no way to move forward in an organisation. It's a one-off. You're using capital for almost like revenue. You then got to top up the reserves back to an acceptable level, which can pose future burdens. It's robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's no way to run an organisation. In respect of rationalising the PCC's office, we're anticipating if there are elections. We know that the Commissioner wishes to retire. She's already a year past the date she wanted to go anyway. There'll be a new Commissioner in place. I think that Commissioner is obviously likely to look at what they think they need, and then we'll get the opportunity next year to look at what the new Commissioner decides they want to do. So I really don't think it's valid to be imposing now a review on something which somebody else has got to pick up the reins for, and may well face a very different world, because we really are, this is not, we're not going to go back to normal, regardless of whether we defeat the virus or not. So I think it's, we're tilting at windmills. We really just need to get on and give the Commissioner and the Chief the money they need to get on and keep the force up to scratch, and register our concerns with the government once again. Thank you.
Thank you. So, to clarify, Mr Pickup's amendment to my proposal is on the floor. It's been opposed by Councillor Sayers. I've got Councillor Aston and Mr Tadeo.
Thanks, Chair. I too are not comfortable with Mr Pickup's amendment, simply because I think it weakens our argument. If we are asking the Commissioner to go to the government and say that this is an unacceptable way forward to fund Merseyside Police going forward in the future, and then we're saying that we need to consider reserves, then the government are simply going to say, well, then go and consider your reserves. That's to coin a phrase, that's a get out of jail card for the government, to be honest. And I think it weakens our argument if we're asking them to look again at the way they fund police forces. The long-term way of funding the force is not to delve into its reserves either. It may be a one-off fix, but it's not going to be a long-term sustainable future for Merseyside Police. So I think it weakens our initial argument that you've already suggested that I would support moving forward, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aston. Mr Tadeo?
I support Councillor Sayers' comments as well. I don't think Mr Pickup's comments are really suitable at this time.
Okay.
Chair, in view of those very sensible comments, I would withdraw my amendment.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Keith. So we have already voted on the actual motion already, that is to accept with the recommendation for the Commissioner to revert to the relevant national government departments. However, since we've had a further discussion, I will just take a vote again, if that's okay with colleagues, just to clarify that point. So all those in favour of my recommendation to accept with the Commissioner being reverted to the national government? Fantastic. All those against? Any abstentions? Very well. I'm delighted to say that that motion has passed and we are endorsing the Precept recommendations for the Commissioner. Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, I just thinking about this, I wonder whether it might be minuted. It's really a separate suggestion, but I think I alluded to it before that I didn't believe when we had 2 years ago the 13.5% increase that the government would have the audacity to carry on, you know, slightly lower level and then back up to 7% this year, but they have. Could I suggest either minuted or just a mental note to officers that perhaps in the next 3 months in the summer that we have an opportunity for the panel to consider what we might call a lobbying exercise. There's the LGA, there's other 40 odd police and crime panels, and I think that when we're not in the hurly-burly of budget setting time or whatever in, you know, January, February, March each year, but in sort of I don't know, August, September, October, that we could actually try and coordinate with other police panels who I'm sure share our views about the unfair burden on loading onto council tax, and make a concerted, serious effort at lobbying the government to saying, you know, this just can't go on. So I just, as I say, it could be just that we agree that we'll do that, or we could have a little additional minute noting that we will, as I say, in the next 3 or 4 months, bring this back for us to consider. So that's an internal matter for this panel. I don't know if that's something that people would support.
No, I think that's sensible, and I think we can consider that for the July meeting potentially and see where we are then. However, I am now conscious of making progress on this, but if Mr. Moran, if you note that and we can consider that at a later stage. Fantastic. Right, 3B, focus on police and crime plan priority, supporting victims, vulnerable people and maintain public safety. Commissioner, do you have anything further to add to the report tabled? Jane, sorry, you're muted again.
Apologies. I'd just like to say thank you to the Chief Constable and to Mr. Dickinson for being on the call during that period. And if it's okay with you, Chair, they'll be able to go off and do other things.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Chair, can I say thank you to the panel for that decision. It's a relief to be able to have the budget agreed and to go forward with it. This next report, look, Chair, to help you, I won't say very much around it. It's a 6-month review of the services. Nick Mills is on the call with us and will be able to respond if there are specific questions. But the report does show the extension to the victim services contracts, which I made a decision on in the early part of the pandemic in order to help the services with their budgets, but also we suspended the victims' needs assessment because this is such a strange period between one PCC and another. I feel very strongly that a new PCC will want to be involved in shaping the services going forward. And finally, it does give detail of the individual grants as they've come through the drip feed of funding from the Ministry of Justice. And that we've done the best that we can to disperse those funds in the most effective way possible. But I'll pause there and say, obviously, we'll answer any questions as best as we're able that the panel may have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Colleagues, do we have any comments, queries or questions on this report? Councillor Jennings. Sarah, sorry, I think you muted still.
Sorry, Chair, I put my hand down but didn't take the microphone. Always something. Thank you, Commissioner. I was going to say, just superficially, it looks like a really good range of services. Do you personally feel there's any gaps there that we, that you should be encouraging to come forward with other kind of support?
And I'm confident that we are providing a broad range of support services under a good umbrella. So we're giving, as far as we're able to do, as much support as we can across all areas. However, it is probably time that a victim's need assessment was conducted, crimes are shifting. There are more crimes online. The nature of crimes is changing, and that therefore victimology is changing too. And that is going to be an important review that a new PCC will take forward. Nick, is there anything you would want to add to that?
No, I think you've said it all there, Commissioner. I think the new victim needs assessment will refresh the work that took place back in 2017. We're very cognizant of the changes in victimisation patterns during the last 4 years. So we're currently working with the force to look at different crime trends and are looking at different legislation that has come out over the last 4 years, such as the Domestic Abuse Bill and many other changes to legislation over that time. And of course, we've seen greater increases in awareness of issues such as child exploitation and other types of crime, and also the more hidden types of crime that we currently commission the likes of Severa UK to support harmful practice type issues. So that will all be included within our work during the victim needs assessment work, which will make recommendations to the new PCC. But just to make it clear that we'll be consulting with partners across local authorities and service providers across Merseyside over the next few months prior to the new PCC arriving.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. I appreciate it. Councillor Jennings, does that answer your question? Well, thank you. Colleagues, do I have any further comments, queries or questions on this agenda item? Very well. Subject to obviously the comments made being taken on board, are we satisfied with the progress of delivery of this agenda item? Thank you, colleagues. I appreciate that. Item C, Police and Crime Commissioner decisions. Commissioner?
I'll just respond to any questions that colleagues might have. There are not a lot of decisions that have been taken.
No. Colleagues, any comments, queries or questions? Brill, are we happy to endorse these decisions? Brill, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Item 4, that is pages 127 to 128, governance decisions.
Chair, the actions emanating from the last meeting are underway, they're in progress, but I haven't got anything to add to that other than to say it's work in progress.
Fantastic, thank you, Commissioner. Colleagues, any questions? No. Are panel members therefore happy with the responses provided and we're happy to move on? Fantastic. Item 5, proposals for Chief Constable recruitment. Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, obviously, following the news that Chief Constable Andy Cook was to retire from the force as Chief, I began to consider very carefully what the options were available to me. It's fair to say that I have had misgivings around conducting a recruitment process so soon before an election. However, when the announcement became public, I consulted with the City Region Mayor and with the Chair of the panel and others to see if there were very strong feelings around this matter. What was fed back to me following those consultations, and to say there were consultations, it's with a small c, it was just more to take soundings. The view is quite broadly held that there is still a lot of doubt around whether elections will take place in May, and therefore, given the pressure that the force is under and the fact that around the northwest region, 2 other forces will be conducting recruitment processes during this immediate period, I felt that I should proceed to set this in motion. However, today's meeting gives me the opportunity to listen closely to the views of the panel. I would reassure you that I've involved the College of Policing very thoroughly in the shaping of every aspect of the proposed recruitment process. This is going to be a difficult job, finding somebody to step into the shoes of Andy Cook. So your answers to the 3 questions that I'm posing, whether you support the process, whether you endorse the preferred independent member, and whether the panel is prepared to offer its chair to perform the role as we did previously in the appointment of Andy Cook. I'd be really pleased to hear your views. Just one error in the report. The identified independent member is in the report is described as Professor Lalou from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. Actually, that should be Catho Dwyer. I do apologise for that. It's interesting, isn't it, how often you can proofread a leaflet and still get the name of the candidate wrong. So I do apologise for that error. But if you will accept that amendment, then please give me your views. I'd be very interested to hear them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Commissioner. Before we move on to the process, I just want to clarify with colleagues, so we're all belt and braces, as Ms O'Dwyer is going to be on the panel and she's the Chief Exec of my council, and I've agreed already to be the independent observer, well, the observer from us to that. Are panel members still okay with me attending, given that my council's Chief Exec will be on the panel? Are you okay that I'll be an impartial observer, or does anyone have any concerns or queries regarding that? No, fantastic. Always nice to hear. Do you colleagues have any questions, queries, or comments on the process that the Commissioner is undertaking? Councillor Shaw.
Thanks. It was just the police commissioner did refer to two other Northwest forces going through the same process. The report does talk about 3: Cheshire, Lancashire, and Greater Manchester. It doesn't really matter whether it's 2 or 3. Could we have an indication of who's? I'm not into dog racing. I think the thing might be first out of the traps, as it were. But anyway, is there an indication of who's in first and where Merseyside lies within that process? I appreciate that's about other forces, but presumably the Commissioner and her colleagues are aware of where we stand in chronologically.
Thank you, Chair. Around the northwest of England, we consider ourselves part of a group of 6 forces. Of those 6 forces, Lancashire has just appointed its new Chief Constable, so they have just run their process. Cheshire announced their process last week, and I think just days before I announced it, I would seek a replacement, seek to recruit a Chief Constable. I anticipate that Greater Manchester Police will also make an announcement that they will conduct a recruitment drive if they haven't done it today. I've been watching to try and understand when they will do theirs, but they have indicated it's imminent. So those would be the forces going through this process. It's got I consider it within the context of the fact that candidates have to be at certain rank and certain level of experience to be able to be considered to be a Chief Constable. So you are fishing from a very relatively small pool of talent. And I feel that it is in Merseyside's best interests to make sure that we are offering the best talent the opportunity to come and be considered as a candidate for Chief Constable of Merseyside Police.
Yeah, just from what I understand from what the Commissioner said there, in terms of being parochial, which I think we're all entitled to be, the good news is that we appear to be slightly ahead of Greater Manchester, which obviously is a very significant, large metropolitan force. We're obviously slightly smaller, but we're in their rank. Sorry, I don't mean that facetiously. We're sort of part of that cluster of, West Midlands, obviously enormous, etc. But I think we're in that league. And the good news is that, from what the Commissioner says, we're just ahead of Greater Manchester. So I'm not saying we get first pick or whatever. I don't think it works that way, but I think I prefer to be just ahead of Greater Manchester than just behind in terms of getting the best possible people applying. So that's great. Thanks for that, Commissioner.
Brilliant. I've got Mr. Pickup, Councillor Rowland, and Mr. Snayo.
Chair, could I just ask the Commissioner? I was partly encouraged when it said Professor Lalou, Tropical Medicine, because he did appear to be independent. we've now got a different name who in certain ways appears to be less independent in that sense, being a chief executive and so on. Could I ask the process for identifying the independent member?
I know that Clive is on the call, and although Clive has been away for a couple of weeks, he has been working very hard on this all the way through to make sure that we're in line with the College of Policing's advice. My understanding is that the College of Policing would be content with almost any of the panel members acting, sorry, the recruitment panel members acting as an independent member other than myself and Steve Rotherham. Going through them, Kath O'Dwyer, Chief Executive of St Helens. I was delighted when Kath agreed to come on representing local authorities. She is very independent. Not only is she independent in her own personality, but she is regarded as officially as an independent person in terms of this recruitment process. She's independent from the police. She's independent from Merseyside Police. Professor Lalou, it's just an error there. He has come on as somebody not associated with policing at all, and yet Merseyside based. Mike Cunningham and Sarah Thornton are both distinguished former police officers who I was really delighted to see that they were willing to join the recruitment panel. Either of those two could have been categorised as an independent member for these purposes. And what the independent member does is they write the report. So I chair the recruitment process and run it, but the independent member writes a report to me to say, following that process, this is the candidate that the panel believe is the best candidate for the role of Chief Constable of Merseyside Police. So that's how the process works. And that will all be considered by the panel, by your panel, in due course.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are you happy with that, Mr. Pickup?
Just to come back quickly, previously when the appointment's been made, I know the panel recommended that the independent member might be someone from the faith community. And I'm wondering whether that was taken into consideration this time.
We did consider. I did consider that, Chair. The previously the Bishop of Liverpool performed that role. It was a process of trying to consider, a bit of headhunting really, to try and consider who we felt might give us that absolute step back from policing and give us that independent that we were looking for. It could have as easily been the bishop, but I think I would have had to have lost one of the other members of the panel. So it was simply that sort of process discussion that we went through when we were considering who could form the panel, the recruitment panel. The panel is actually one member larger than the College of Policing recommends. So I'm confident that we've got a very, very good quality group of people who will work with me through this recruitment process. And above everything, I'm so pleased that our City Mayor, Steve Rotherham, is going to be working with me on this in the same way that Andy Burnham would be working with Bev Hughes in Greater Manchester. For me, that's the right and proper way for us to do this. Clive's got his hand up.
I'm very happy with the strength of the panel.
Thank you, Keith. Clive?
Thank you, Chair. Just to underscore what the Commissioner has said there, the system for selecting the IPM has actually changed slightly since Mr. Cook's appointments. Previously, the College of Policing would hold a list of people, named individuals who could be selected by a Commissioner to be appointed as the IPM. That has changed now, and Home Office guidance states a list of roles that can't perform the role of IPM and a list of roles of individuals who can. And in the list of individuals who can, it clearly states that a chief executive of a local authority is perhaps a preferred appointment to the IPM role. So in that regard, we're quite tight with College of Policing and Home Office guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. I next had Councillor Rowlands.
Thanks, Chair. Can I say that I was going to ask the question that Keith asked about the member of faith, but that's been answered. First of all, I endorse the process. I think it's absolutely right to endorse the process. I also endorse the independent member because it's really important on the. And thanks, Shane, for explaining what that independent member is on the writing pad.
So if I can just cut across you there, sorry, had you finished? Your audio was going a bit haywire then whilst you were speaking. I just want to double check that you managed to get your point across.
I was just saying thank you to Jane for explaining what the independent panel member does in participating in it, and that's why I endorse having a independent member included on the panel, and I endorse the process of the mechanism.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Brian.
I was going to ask the same question as Keith, to be honest. So more or less word for word. Thank you. But thank you for Jane for the comments. Appreciate it.
No worries. Are there any further comments, queries, or questions on this agenda item? Very well. I will put the question then.
Sorry, Chair, could I just make one very last comment? And this is something I really can't let go by. I'm really, really pleased that out of a recruitment panel of 6, 3 of them are women. Myself, Catherine Dwyer, and Sarah Thornton. And I'm just, for me, that's a really big cheer. But thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it. Right. So, are we happy to support the process, endorse the independent member, and happy that I'll be observing the interviews as we go on? All those in favour?
Agreed, Chair.
Yeah, agreed, Chair.
Any against? Any abstentions? Fantastic. That therefore moves. We have one further agenda item, which is in relation to any other business. I do want to make a brief comment on this, and panel members will be aware of why. Any other business has a very strict definition of this panel, and that is largely due to what we can actually deal with as part of this panel. I have received no requests that fulfil these necessities, and therefore we've received no AOBs to carry on. Therefore, I'm happy to call the meeting closed, and I thank each and every one of you for your attendance and engagement this morning.
Thank you, Chair.
Have a good day, everyone. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. Stay safe.
Bye.